Hello, I'm Anika from Made to Sew and welcome to our quilted keyring tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to be showing you how to make either the heart or the circle shapes in our quilted keyrings. If you wish to quilt your fabric prior to this, you will need to follow the link in the description box below to our quilting tutorial. Otherwise, you're welcome to sew this with fabric that isn't quilted as well. However, we would recommend choosing something slightly thicker. The fabrics that we've used here are a Liberty Tana lawn, and they'll be perfect if you've quilted the fabric. But if you decide not to quilt the fabric, I would recommend purchasing a lightweight upholstery fabric, just so that it's stiff enough to hold the shape. So let's get started. Start by collecting the material that you will need to make the quilted keyrings. Obviously, you're going to need some fabric of your choice. If you wish to quilt your fabric, you will need some wadding, and we used a 100% cotton wadding for our quilting. You will need some coordinating thread, a keyring ring of some description, the pattern for either the heart or the circle, and you can download this for free, and there'll be a link to that in the description box below. Some stuffing for stuffing the keyring after we've created it. And in terms of the other equipment you may find useful, some pins, a needle, a ruler, and some removable pens, be it chalk or a pen that comes off with water or air. If you can collect up all of the supplies that you will need, then we can get started. Once you've chosen the fabric that you wish to make your keyring from, you will need to decide whether you wish to quilt it, and this is an optional step. If you wish to quilt it, you will need some wadding of some description. We used a lightweight 100% cotton wadding. And you will need to draw quilting lines onto your fabric. The wadding will be positioned on the back of the fabric. And the quilting lines we drew were 1/4 of an inch, 5 millimeters in width. If you wish to quilt your fabric, I would recommend watching our quilting video, and we'll put a link to that in the description box below. Then you will also need your pattern pieces, and these can be downloaded off our website, and again a link will be in the description box below for these. There is a heart and a circle, and the circle is a 2-inch or 5 centimeter circle. You will also need to cut out a tab in your fabric, and this doesn't need to be quilted. And this is 2 inches or 5 centimeters by 1.5 inches, so 1.5 inches, which is 3.8 centimeters. So we've got a width of 2 inches, 5 centimeters, and a height of 1.5 inches, which is 3.8 centimeters. So quilt your fabric and cut out your tab, and we can move on to the next step. You're going to firstly start by preparing the tab, and you want to position the tab with the wrong side of the fabric facing up. Now, working with the largest side, which is your 2 inches or 5 centimeters, you're going to be folding in this side. So you're folding in the largest side, both the sides to the middle, and we're going to give that a press. And then we're going to fold it in half again and give it another press. So we should be left with a tab that has a width of 1/2 inch, 1.2 centimeters, and a length of 1.5 inches, 3.8 centimeters. You're going to position a pin into the folded edge, and we're going to take this to the sewing machine to sew. So 1/8, 3 millimeters away from the edge of the tab. Start with the 2 folded edges, the edge that you pin together, and sew a standard straight stitch, which is 2.5 millimeters in length. You may find it a little bit difficult to start because you're working with a very small bit of fabric, but it should be okay. If you find it difficult to backstitch at the start and at the end, please feel free to tie off your threads instead. Once you've completed the first side of the tab, take the tab from out of the machine, trim your threads, and do exactly the same on the opposite side. Once you've sewn both sides of the tab, you want to trim your threads. Then you want to fold this in half with your right side facing out. And you want to take your keyring and position that into the fold. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're literally going to stitch about 1/8 3mm away from our raw edge here to hold the keyring in position and to make it easier for us to attach the tab and keyring into our keyring. So backwards and forwards about 1/8 3mm away from the bottom edge of the tab to hold the keyring in position. This doesn't need to look neat, it's just to hold everything together. If your machine struggles, please use the hand wheel to help it walk forwards. And then sew backwards, and that will do. Take your quilted fabric and lay that with your wrong side facing up. And then you can take your template, which you can download from the website, or obviously you're welcome to draw your own. And we're going to position the template with the wrong side of your fabric facing up, and we're going to draw around it. And I would use a removable pen for this because they don't have any seam allowances on these pieces. We're going to be adding our seam allowances in a second. So I'm using a pen that comes off with the air, but a pen that comes off with water, pencil or even chalk would do. The key thing you want to do after you've drawn around it is to mark your opening points. At the bottom here you'll have a little opening enclosure, and this needs to be marked because this is the part we are not going to sew of the heart, so that you can turn it around afterwards. We've also put some markings for the tab up here, so it would be good again for you to mark that, and that's where our little tab is going to sit in. If you've downloaded the circle and we want to be making the circle one, we again have put markings for the tab at the top of the circle. In terms of the opening points, because you're working with a circle, it doesn't really matter where you start or stop, but you want to leave yourself a gap of about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters, so that you can turn it around, and we'll hand sew that up afterwards. Once you've drawn around the template edge and you've marked the opening and closing for the turning around and also for the tab at the top here, you want to then add a seam allowance. And we're going to be working with 1/4 inch 5mm seam allowance, and we're literally going to draw from our first line, which is drawing around the template and will become our stitching line, outside of that with the ruler and again a removable pen. And you just want to measure around the 1/4 inch 5mm and draw that on. Cut out on the shape that you're working with on the outside line. And the same would apply that we've done here with the heart, with the circle. If you're working with that template, you would draw around the circle, you would add the 1/4 inch 5mm seam allowance and mark your gap for the tab and for the opening, and then trim around the outside edge, just like we're doing now. Once you've cut out the heart shape, we're going to get the other side to our keyring. You want to position your two pieces right sides together. And a point to add here is that you don't have to cut out your second side exactly as we did the first side. We're going to be using the first side and the markings that we've drawn here for sewing in a second. So the second side really can just be a square of fabric, and as long as the square is larger than your heart that we've cut out, it will work, and it means it saves a little bit of time. So I want you to pin them together, right sides facing. And finally, before we actually sew this, we need to put in our tab. Okay, so we did mark this on the top edge of our heart, and you will have the markings if you're working with the circle as well. Now you need to take this and you need to be sure that the ring of this goes into the heart, okay? So we're going to be sewing with this going in, because we will obviously be turning this around afterwards. We want the two edges of our tab to sit with our notches that we drew here. So it will be a little bit fiddly putting this in place, and this is why we cut out one side of the heart, because it makes it easier for you to see that the two edges are lining up there and that the top edge of your tab is sitting flush with the 1/4 inch 5mm seam allowance. And this should get you the correct angle for a nice finish. And we'll put a pin to hold that all together. So pin this together, position your tab in place, and join me at the sewing machine. Start by sewing at one of the tabs on your shape, whether it be the heart or the circle you're working with. We're going to leave the space between the tabs as the hole for turning this around in a second. Sew backwards and forwards to start, and then literally sew around the line of the tab that you're working with. Make sure that you hit the point right at the bottom of the heart. Place the needle down and lift up the foot and turn your fabric. You're welcome to walk your needle if you wish to make sure that you get there using the hand wheel. And we're sewing this with a standard straight stitch of 2.5mm in length. Sewing over the tab area may be slightly tricky, and you may again need to use the hand wheel to make sure that you can get up onto the tab, and then the machine should be fine sewing again. Take out the pins as you go. Sew until you reach the other marking and backstitch. Once you have sewn around your shape, trim your threads, and then we're actually going to trim back the fabric here. Now you want to trim the remaining fabric to 1/8 3mm away from your stitching line using a small pair of scissors. The only part of this you do not want to trim is between the markings for the turning gap. We want to leave that at the 1/4 inch, 5mm as it is. And you also want to cut off the bottom point of the heart. So we're going to leave this bit at a 1/4 inch, 5mm, and so I'm going to cut my other piece of fabric to the same distance, and then I'll cut back in to 1/8. And complete that all the way around your shape. Once you've trimmed down your seam allowances, if you're working with a removable pen, obviously you can remove it, and then we're going to turn it around through the very small hole that we left. Now this is a little bit fiddly, and it seems to be okay once you've got it going, but it is difficult to get it started. But using your fingers, just keep working with it until you bring it all to the right side. Fabulous. And then you can really poke in with your fingers and make sure that you poke out all of the edges. Once you've turned this around to the right side, you want to use the hole that we left to stuff your shape, whether it be the heart or the circle. We're just using a 100% polyester stuffing, and we're just going to feed that in and make it as compact as you can, really, to make sure that you do get a nice shape. Once you're happy with how you've stuffed your heart, you want to turn in the opening to hide all of those raw edges and position a pin in just to hold it together. So now I want you to complete a slip stitch to fasten the little hole. You will need a needle and thread. If you haven't completed a slip stitch before, then please follow the link to our tutorial, and that will be in the description box below. And there you have it, your very own quilted keyring. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you've learned something new, and thanks for watching.